Tonight, Chicago Public Library is pleased to welcome one of Chicago's best, author Renee Rosen, in conversation with another wonderful local author, Shelby Van Pelt. What a treat. Renee Rosen is the USA Today bestselling author of Fifth Avenue Glamour Girl, The Social Graces, Park Avenue Summer, Windy City Blues, one of my favorites, White Collar Girl, What the Lady Wants, and Dollface, as well as the young adult novel Every Crooked Pot. She is a native of Akron, Ohio, and a graduate of American University in Washington, D.C. Renee's highly anticipated new book, Let's Call Her Barbie, follows the creative rebels behind Barbie, including Ruth Handler, the co-founder of the Barbie company, who had a delightful cameo in the 2023 blockbuster film. Ruth herself was a trailblazer, building her own legacy in a workplace hostile to women's contributions. But much like the iconic dolls she created, her tenacity for success took the world by storm. Our moderator this evening is Shelby Van Pelt. Born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, she lives in the suburbs of Chicago with her family. Remarkably Bright Creatures, her first novel, was an instant New York Times bestseller and a Read with Jenna Today Show book club pick. In 2023, she is awarded the Heartland Prize for Fiction and the McLaughlin Esmond Steen's First Novel Prize from the Writers' Center. Now, please join me in welcoming Renee and Shelby to the stage.
Okay, tap, tap, we're on.
Okay.
All right.
Hello.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Braving the weather on a pretty cold night. I'm still warming up. I forgot my coat on the walk over here.
I know, this poor girl.
But the stage lights are going to do it for me, I think. Renee, welcome. And we're so happy to have you here to talk about Let's Call Her Barbie.
Thank you.
Which has been out for what, about 2 weeks now?
About 2.5 weeks.
2.5 weeks, super exciting. I was lucky enough to read an early copy of this last fall, and I inhaled it. It's such a well-written, snappy dialogue, fast-paced, but not afraid to really get into some of the issues that that these folks were going through at this time in the past. Really, it's historical fiction, I guess.
It is, but it's also kind of like a cultural, because everybody had some association with Barbie.
Everyone has
whether
some,
you loved
some
her or
touch,
hated her,
touch point
you
for
know?
it. Yeah. Well, it's just fantastic. If you guys haven't read it yet, you're going to love it. We'll try to keep the spoilers to a minimum, although I guess with a book where it's based on a true story, there's not that many spoilers.
Yeah, some people kind of know, but there were still a lot of surprises when I was researching, so.
This book was kind of floating around within you for quite a while. Why don't you tell us the story of how it came about? Because it was not inspired by the movie, right?
Not at all, not at all. And so what happened was in 2019, I was on a panel about feminism with a woman who was very high up in the doll division at Mattel. And she started telling me the story of Ruth Handler, and I just got goosebumps. And I knew at that point that I was gonna do a novel about this. I just had to. But I had 2 other books that were already in the pipeline. And I remember talking to my editor about The Social Graces, and I said, I know what our next book is gonna be. And she's like, no, let's finish this one. We've got Esty, then we'll talk about the next book. So it had been percolating in the back of my mind. And then I had started writing, and then the movie stuff just exploded. And there was so much FOMO going on. And we thought about trying to crash the book, which is, push it out ahead of schedule. And the end of the day, it was like, I can't chase this trend. Barbie's evergreen. The book has to be right. But I will tell you this much: remember when they were like, we knew the movie was coming, but they weren't saying anything about what the movie was.
Yeah, it was just like a giant pair of feet.
Yeah.
Stepping onto a bedroom carpet. Yeah.
And then they finally released the very first trailer. And it was Barbie in that iconic black and white swimsuit, and all the little girls are smashing their baby dolls. And I thought, oh my God, this is what my novel is about. What am I gonna do? Thankfully, the movie went off in a much different direction. I was like, phew.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you had a moment where you panicked.
Many.
Because I feel like as writers, as creatives, at least I know this is true for me. I'm always afraid that someone on the other side of the world is doing the same thing as me. You know, you're afraid that nothing you're doing is actually original. How did you move past that?
And now there's all these octopus books. Have you noticed?
It's a coincidence, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't it? You were there first. You were there first.
I got lucky.
Yeah. No, you. By the way, if you have not read Remarkably Bright Creatures, grab it tonight. Have Shelby sign it. It's amazing. Just, you're going to fall in love with Marcellus. You're going to fall in love with the whole story. It's just brilliant.
Thank you.
So I'm a fan, big fan. So
So how did you get past the? Did you just kind of have to have that confidence in your story that it was going to be different and better?
you know, it was my agent, my editor, kind of holding my hand, saying, "Breathe, breathe. It's going to be okay." You know, but I will say that the movie, first of all, I think it did a lot for Barbie's image, because a lot of people that hated Barbie, I think, sort of started to rethink her a little bit, and she's kind of cool now, even though you might still not love her. But it did affect the marketing of the book, which I'm really grateful for, because when I first pitched the idea of Barbie, I'm an ad girl. So, and you know, prior to the movie, Barbie was still a bit of a lightning rod. And I put together a PowerPoint presentation of all the reasons why this book was the right next move. And you know, it's got a baked-in audience. There's all these Barbie collectors, and there's a Barbie sold every 3 seconds around the world. But I didn't have any pink in the PowerPoint.
Wow, that's hard to imagine.
Yeah, I steered away from that, and then, you know, and that was obviously that was before the movie, you know, and then we just couldn't get enough pink.
Yeah, I mean, look at us all now. Do we have any pink in the audience? I see a couple.
All right.
Yeah,
all
nice.
right, you got the Barbie spirit.
Yeah. No, it is. It's very. It's just such an iconic, just image and color, and I'm so happy for you that you sort of had the timing to get into the middle of that cultural moment. You know, it's almost like the sort of thing that you can't plan it if you try, right?
Right. And in retrospect, I do think the book is dropping at the right time. I think it would have gotten lost had it come out in the midst of all the movie stuff. I think the book would have gotten lost.
There would have just been comparisons that
Yeah.
aren't really valid.
Yeah, and you know, there was so much Barbie. It was hard to get, you know, any noise, but obviously I think there's still a hunger to know more about Barbie, and everybody was very curious. By the way, did everybody who here saw the movie? Okay. All right. So, I think when people saw Rhea Perlman, you know, on the screen, did our mics just cut out?
Here.
I think mine did. So we'll share. So when Rhea Perlman came on the screen, I think people were really, I immediately knew it was going to be Ruth Handler, but I think people were sort of curious, like, who is this woman and what is she doing here?
Yeah, it was such a nice little, almost like a teaser.
Yeah.
It was like a teaser for your book. They didn't know they were doing that.
How nice of
but they did
Greta
it.
to do that for me.
It was very nice. It was very nice. So you obviously did a lot of research. And speaking to you beforehand, it sounds like you were really just personally pulled into this research in a very all-consuming way. Could you speak a little bit about what that was like?
Well, I mean, I grew up with Barbie. She was a constant companion when I was growing up. You know, I never went anywhere without my Barbie case and my Barbies. I still have my original Barbies. So, you know, when I was doing the research, I always start with reading. I never read any fiction on a topic. I learned that lesson a long time ago. But I'll read any biographies, memoirs, all that. And then I got really stupid, crazy lucky, and I went to the Barbie Collectors Convention that it travels, and it just so happened to be in Chicago. It was out by O'Hare, and I go in there, and it was this amazing world of like thousands of Barbie collectors.
So this is like at a convention center by O'Hare.
Yeah.
And these people are they selling Barbies, or they're just enthusiasts?
They're collecting, and it's just a celebration of Barbie. I never knew there was so much Barbie accoutrement to be had. There are Barbie purses, Barbie shoes, Barbie earrings, you know, and just dealers were there, because Barbie is big money. I think she's collected, if not as much as baseball cards, and she's right up there. And, you know, I had no idea what I had stepped into, and I came home the first night and I was so overwhelmed, and I said to John, I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to get a lot out of this, but this was really cool. And there's people walking around with Barbies, that look like themselves, so, and after the second night, I came home and I'm like, Barbie Nation, and we like uncrated all my Barbies, and it was just amazing. But I really hit the jackpot because I was reading a research book at the time called Dressing Barbie by Carol Spencer, who was one of the original Barbie designers. She was 90 years old when I met her. She happened to be at the convention, nice as could be, and she's Mattel royalty. They put her on a pink throne and everything. And John and I took her out to lunch, and she shared all these stories about her journey with Barbie and what it was like working at Mattel in 1963.
She would have worked for Ruth.
She worked
Yeah.
with Ruth, she worked with Jack Ryan, and Jack Ryan, who was the head engineer, if Ruth Handler was the mother of Barbie, then Jack was the father of Barbie. And Jack was the heartthrob of Mattel. He stood 5'5", 5'8" with his 3-inch elevator lifts, and the women just went gaga for him. And I asked Carol, I said, what was it, about Jack? And she said, Jack could promise you the sun and the moon. And it was, like she gave me some insights into everybody's personalities and little details that I wasn't going to find in any other source material that I could put in the book of what the culture was like at Mattel.
Have you spoken with her since the book has come out?
We exchanged a couple emails back and forth. She's 93, 94 now. She still goes to all the Barbie conventions, and she's just a delight. I mean, she shared things with me like, for example, at Mattel, when you walked in the morning, there was classical music playing. And then Elliot, who was the co-owner of Mattel, after lunch in the cafeteria, because they were out by the airport, there was nothing else out there. So after lunch, Elliot would change the music from classical to marching music because he thought that warded off the afternoon slump. So, everybody's working, it's on Wisconsin, on, And she shared all that stuff with me and little tidbits that were just amazing.
And were you writing this down, or did you
I
record it?
had notes, and I had John, because he's a better listener than I am, so, and we were comparing notes afterwards, but it was amazing, and, people would line up to have Carol sign their Barbies or sign, the outfits. She made a lot of those iconic outfits, that I grew up playing with. She designed them. So, she really is Mattel royalty.
That's amazing. Where did this lovely lady here come from?
So I found her on, I always say this wrong, Etsy. I always want to say Etsy. So I found a woman who made her. I sent her a picture of me, and she's better dressed than I am. She has a better wardrobe.
You both look great.
But she's super fun, and I created an office for her, and she has her own Apple, her own Mac, and her own cell phone, and her bookcase. And
It's a modern woman.
I sort of, anytime little tiny packages arrived, John was like, oh my God, more? There's more coming? So.
Did anyone here bring a Barbie with them tonight? Are we going to see any tonight? No? She's on her own tonight.
Huh.
But it is something that I feel like so many people...
People have been bringing their
Yeah.
Barbies to events, which is just so cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool to tap into just that, one of those unique shared cultural things that, particularly women, but I think anyone has some memory of or
Yeah.
connection to,
Yeah.
no matter what their circumstances are. Did you have a favorite character to write?
Jack Ryan.
Really?
He was a hot mess. So,
He's kind of frustrating.
he's maddening, but what a great character to work with. In fact, in the earlier drafts, they said, okay, Jack is eclipsing everybody else in the book. You got to bring him down. I said, oh, no. I'll bring the others up. I'm not bringing Jack down. So just a little bit about Jack Ryan. He was the definition of a mad genius. He went to Yale. He was an engineer. He went to work for Raytheon right out of college, and he was designing Sparrow and Hawk missiles before he started designing Barbie for the Pentagon. He had all kinds of demons. He was, and I don't want to give too much away, but you learn this very early on. He was bipolar. He was severely dyslexic. I mean, the guy couldn't read. He made it through Yale without reading a single textbook or a paper. He's set up study groups, and nobody knew that he couldn't read. He was a sex addict. He was married to a woman named Barbara, nicknamed Barbie. Ruth's daughter was Barbara, nicknamed Barbie. If you think that gets confusing, you're right.
And this is all true to life.
It's true. I think when people get to the end of the book, because I have an author's note, and from what I've heard from people, they're surprised by how much of this actually happened. I mean, fact is stranger than fiction. And, it was, Jack was just so much fun to work with. He ends up marrying Zsa Zsa Gabor. He has these wild parties at his Bel Air mansion that are, they rival Hugh Hefner's at the Playboy Mansion. And he was so much fun to work with. And I was kind to him because he was not as, and I use this word with some trepidation, appealing as he is in the book, in real life.
And how did you decide, not just with Jack, but maybe with all of the characters, all of whom, I think there are a couple exceptions, but most of the characters are based on real people.
Yes.
How did you ever have any moments where you weren't sure how far to take it with the fictional part?
Fiction. When I introduce a fictional character into, I guess what they call biographical historical fiction, I always do it for a particular purpose. And in this case, I have a fictional Barbie designer. Her name is Stevie. And the reason I used her was I wanted to show through a fresh pair of eyes what the culture was like at Mattel. Because I couldn't do that through management, through Ruth or Jack or even Charlotte Johnson, who was the very first Barbie fashion designer. But from a young eye, a young fashion designer through her lens, what that culture was like. And, here you have all these Ivy League engineers, toy designers. It's a creative culture. They're having squirt gun fights during the day. They're setting up orgies on their desk with Barbie and Ken. It was just, they had a beach nearby, and they had volleyball games, and everybody was canoodling with everybody else.
It was like tech before tech was tech.
Yeah. And, and I wanted to show the spell that Jack Ryan could have on the women. And, Ruth was certainly not going to fall for him. And Charlotte, they all had his number. They were like, please, Jack Ryan. Like, they were baffled by, his magnetism, supposedly, that he had with women. But, a young fashion designer, she might have been sort of curious about him. And, he was sort of the giver of orgasms.
Lovely.
I'm cringing a little as I say that.
Was there like a group of people that could have been Stevie? I mean, did that role would have existed? It's just that she didn't exist herself.
Right. Charlotte Johnson was the very first designer. She had been a New York fashion designer who moved out to LA, and Ruth Handler enlisted her to design this really high-end fashion for an 11.5-inch doll, which, those zippers never existed, the little tiny buttons and all that. And so, eventually it was just too much work for Charlotte to do. She was spending a lot of time in Japan because the clothes were so intricate they could not cost-effectively be manufactured here in the States, so they did them in Japan. But so Carol Spencer came on in 1963. There were a slew of other designers, but I didn't know. It was really hard to trace who was still alive, who wasn't, and I didn't want to be restricted by that because I didn't know who, I just didn't know their backgrounds. And I also wanted to give Carol her due without imposing other things upon her.
Bringing the romance and the sex and all of that. which you gotta have because it makes a good story. And but yeah, I can see why you'd want to
I wouldn't do that to
foist
Carol.
that upon a fictional
Yeah, I don't think
character.
Carol ever fell for Jack Ryan. I
Let
think
poor
I
Stevie
think she
take
was
the
a little like, oh yeah, Jack. Like she could understand where it came from, but she wasn't falling for it.
If you were to make us, I think I probably know the answer to this, but if you were to do a spin-off of one character, who would you pick?
Jack.
Definitely Jack. Jack, early Jack.
Early Jack, Jack's demise, yeah.
It's fun. It's fun to write other people's demise, isn't it?
He was such a hot mess, really and truly.
Yeah.
But a brilliant mind,
Yeah,
just
which-
a mad genius.
I guess a lot of times those things go together. So, what is one thing that you learned that you were surprised by in doing all this research?
Can I say two things?
I guess so.
Okay. So the first was that Barbie was inspired by a German prostitute gag doll for men. That's Barbie's DNA. Bild Lilly. She was a German prostitute based on a comic strip in Germany about a gold digger, this very risque gold digger. And she was so popular in this tabloid that they decided to make her into a little novelty doll that you gave at bachelor parties and stuff like that. When Ruth Handler saw that doll, she said, that's what I'm talking about. So, that was Barbie's DNA. The second thing, Barbie's body has always come under a lot of criticism. But one of the things that I found fascinating was that her measurements, she's the equivalent of 1/6 the scale of a real woman. So if Barbie were a real woman, she would stand about 5'9". She'd weigh 110 pounds. Somebody give her a steak. But she would have, I think it's a 39 bust, an 18-inch waist, and 33-inch hips. Okay? But that was not about some misogynistic fantasy. It was all driven by the wardrobe. So what Charlotte astutely pointed out is that there is no such thing as 1/6 scale of fabric. Fabric, the thickness of fabric is fabric is fabric. And for her to make those beautiful waistlines with the zippers and the hook and eyes and the buttons, all that was adding bulk. So unless Barbie's waist was abnormally thin, she would have looked really boxy. She would have no longer had that hourglass figure. I can't speak for her bust line. I think that was probably Jack's doing.
Definitely Jack.
Yeah. But,
the
she
dog.
had like a size 3, the equivalent of a size 3 shoe. If Barbie had a size 7 shoe, it would have looked clown-like, So there was all this optical illusion, and that was very surprising to me.
Because they can't get the material thin enough
Right.
to cling to her the way that it would cling to a full-size person.
Right.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I loved reading that too.
Yeah. Oh, and another thing was that Ruth had 2 children. I mentioned this before. The daughter was Barbara. Guess what her son's name was? Ken. Can't make this stuff up.
What about Alan? Did Alan show up in your research at all?
Yeah. So, okay. So for those
Favorite character in the Barbie movie.
Yeah. So Alan was named after Ruth Handler's son-in-law. So her daughter Barbara marries Alan Siegel. Ruth was never a fan of Alan Siegel's. It was not a happy marriage, and it did not last very long. But when they divorced, Ruth canceled. She just, discontinued the Alan doll
Bye,
until
Alan.
the movie. So, he came back for the movie.
And we got to see Michael Cera in probably my favorite role of his. You've written a lot of historical fiction and things that take place across different timelines. How do you get yourself, beyond the research of, the particular facts of Mattel and Barbie, do you have like a ritual that lets you get into the right era? Like, do you listen to music? Do you watch movies from that era?
Sometimes I'll watch some movies like with Windy City Blues, which is about it's an interracial love story wrapped around the birth of the Chicago Blues and the civil rights movement. So for that, I was constantly listening to like Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and Little Walter and all that. So we constantly had music going on. but I think there's just, I mean, you kind of have to be somewhat obsessed. And, the story, even when you're not physically writing, you're probably, in that aquarium and, I mean, you kind of have to live in the space that you're creating. So I think that we probably all kind of go into that world, and it's hard to sometimes pull back out of it and like, oh yeah, there's bills to be paid and there's laundry to do and, all that stuff.
I always think one of the most challenging things about writing a story that takes place in a timeline where I haven't spent most of my life or maybe even ever lived would just be, do you have to discipline yourself with, what kind of language is used? And, obviously they're not going to have the cell phones and the tech and the things that we have.
And I mean, you can get really tripped up, and believe me, someone out there will tell you if you've misstepped,
Yeah.
You'll get an email saying the bustle disappeared in 1873 and didn't reappear until 1878. So remember that if you're writing about a bustle. They weren't around. Or there were X amount of buttons on something. But, like things like I did a book set in the Roaring 20s, Dollface, and they didn't have zippers then. And I kept having everybody, unzip this and unzip that. Well, there were no zippers. So thankfully, that's when a good copy editor comes in hand. But, little things like, I would catch things in my books like I had somebody cradling a phone, back when they had remember the mouthpieces that, we don't remember, but we've seen them. So there were no phones to cradle. Or, oh God, I did, White Collar Girl was set in the 50s. And I kept referring to the Kennedy Expressway. And there was no Kennedy Expressway. At one point, I'm going to do a book of bloopers, just all the stuff that,
That would be great.
So.
Yeah, I bet a lot of authors have some document that has all of those
and like,
things.
I mean, you try and catch everything that you can. And thank God I caught the Kennedy Expressway, so that got fixed. But, it's stuff like that can really trip you up.
Yeah, some people, it really bothers them. I had an octopus trying to operate a photocopier at one point. And was told by my folks that knew marine biology that was a bridge too far.
That was taking Marcellus a little bit.
They can do a lot, but they can't fix a paper jam. Neither can I, to be fair. Well, it sounds like you had so much fun writing this book, but there are a lot of themes that I felt really were resonant for like our present time, even though it's a book that takes place in a different time. I loved that the characters in this book are just totally unafraid to break with conventional wisdom and try something brand new. Take a doll that is modeled after a prostitute and make her into a toy for children in spite of the backlash that they face. There's sort of an idea that they have this almost radical commitment to this idea, to this art, really. I love the way that you described particularly the approach to fashion as really art. And of course, they're going to make money off of this, and it's a business, and it's a product. But I think there's a real, you can really sense the passion of these folks to bring Barbie to life. The idea that one person or one team of people can have an impact, can really make a lasting difference in our culture if they care enough and if they're, sort of dogged enough in their pursuit of it. I'm wondering, what do you want readers to take away from Let's Call Her Barbie?
The main thing, and this is what I've heard from people that have read the book, is that it brought back childhood memories and that it was an escape for them. And I think if ever we need that, it's right now. And that just warms my heart that people are like, oh my God, I remember G.I. Joe and I remember playing with this and the music and all that. So that's been super rewarding. And if this book can take you out of the current drama going on, and it's more than drama, just take you away from reality for an hour, 15 minutes here and there, then that pleases me a lot.
And that's something amazing that books can do. And I feel like it is needed right now more than ever.
Yeah, stories. There's just to get lost in a good story.
But it's not just like the same as I mean, it would be a good beach read. Like you could take this to the beach for sure. But I did find it very inspiring at the end of the day. It is.
Well, it's a story about creation. It's a story, I see some guys in the audience here that, it's a business caper too, in a way. I mean, this is a woman who had a vision, and everybody told her you cannot give little girls a doll with breasts to play with. It's indecent. It can't be done. The engineers told her it's too complicated. It can't be done. And even after 3 years of trial and error to get Barbie right, they brought her out at Toy Fair and she still flopped. FAO Schwarz took no orders. Sears and Roebuck took no orders. All the mom and pop shops wouldn't touch her. Mattel, Elliot and the rest of Mattel, they were ready to just say, okay, it didn't work. We failed. Let's move on. And Ruth dug in and said, no, I refuse. She had TV. She had a TV commercial that was already locked, loaded, ready to go on the Mickey Mouse Club, and she had spent a lot of time doing research on how to market Barbie, and she just believed. She really believed in that vision, and she just would not back down.
Yeah, the power of not taking no for an answer.
Yeah, and I find characters, people like that really inspiring, that just don't accept failure,
And don't take the easy path.
Right. Yeah. And she did really change culture. She changed. Barbie was created to empower young girls, children, to be and do whatever they wanted. She recognized that her son Ken had toy soldiers, he had trucks, he had guns to play with, you could play cowboys and Indians, but her daughter, Barbara, only had baby dolls. And she just felt that was perpetuating that stereotype that little girls were only going to grow up to be mommies.
Yep.
That was all they could be.
And that's how we get to that opening sequence of the Barbie movie with
Yeah.
the little girls smashing all of the baby dolls.
Yep.
Which I watched with my 10-year-old, and she was just like, this is kind of violent. And I'm like, I'm here for it. Well, I was hoping we could do like a little lightning round of kind of this or that questions. They don't have to be that lightning. We've got plenty of time.
Okay.
And go through those, talk a little bit about sort of how the sausage is made, some writing craft questions in here, and then we will have some time for Q&A in maybe about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yep.
Okay, so these are questions for you, Renee, as a writer.
Okay.
Do you prefer to write in the morning, at night, or other?
Always in the morning. I get up and it's before anything else is in my head. I make my coffee, I sit down, and I just empty out. Because I go to bed at night thinking about the next scene.
Do you ever write things down in the night that you then wake up?
I gave that up a long time ago because I would have this brilliant idea, and one of two things
They're
would
always
happen.
brilliant at night.
They're always brilliant at night. I either couldn't read my handwriting in the morning, or I'm like, that is the stupidest idea. What was I thinking? So I gave that part up.
Yeah, I've had the dreams where I'm so convinced that this is going to be my next novel.
I want to have a dream that tells me what the next book is.
Well, they're not.
People say that, oh, I dreamed it, and it's the whole thing, and then...
Well, no, they're not good. That's the problem. You wake up in the morning and it's just ducks and ice cream. And I'm like, what? No, that's not a novel. That's a fever dream. Okay, coffee, tea, or something else?
Coffee.
Wine, cocoa?
Coffee. I don't know, I know James Thurber was drunk the whole time he wrote, and so was Hemingway, and I would just fall asleep at night.
Yeah, I find that when I'm writing, whatever it is that I'm consuming, whether it's coffee, tea, water, LaCroix, or wine, it tends to kind of go down the hatch without me really realizing it.
Yeah.
And that's a problem when it's wine.
Yeah, yeah. And my coffee always goes cold, so I have like half a mug, and John's like, "Are you ever gonna finish a cup of coffee before pour it out, and make another cup?"
It'll get microwaved 8 times.
Yeah, exactly,
Yep.
exactly.
Do you prefer to type, write longhand, or some combination of those?
I type and I use Scrivener. Do you use Scrivener?
I do use Scrivener. Yeah.
That's a software program for writers, and it lets you keep all your research in one place. You can break down a chapter into scenes. It just, I don't know how I wrote without it.
Yeah, you can like drag things around and
Yeah.
change the order, which I do way too much.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then I mess up all of my timelines.
Yep.
But they make it very easy to do that,
Oh
which
my
is
God.
nice.
Timelines. Okay, continuity. I tend to write stuff that spans over like 3 decades. So I have somebody, they're like 18 in one chapter, and then they're like 12, and I'm always screwed up in continuity.
They're on the page, but they aren't born yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably didn't have that issue with. Did you have a continuity?
Oh, I had huge issues. I had a lot of issues anyway. But in my book, one of my characters is writing this like day by day journal almost.
Oh, that's right.
And it was a huge problem when I would start dragging things around in
Oh,
Scrivener.
yeah.
And I think my editor was just so fed up with me by the end of that process. I had like a line of Post-its going across the living room. And
It's
then I
messy.
would change just one thing, and then like, oh, now the whole
No,
thing's
and then
thrown
it's a tapestry, right? I mean, you pull one thing and
off. Oh,
it
the whole thing
changes.
falls apart.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
But Scrivener makes it so easy for us to do that.
Yes.
So thank you, Scrivener. Are you more of an outline making plotter, or are you more of what we sometimes call a pantser, aka you go by the seat of your pants?
I'm a total pantser. I never know where I'm going from one scene to the next, from one chapter to the next. I never know how a book's going to end. I read Story Genius, which says you should never write a book until you know the ending. So, and I remember how you started your book. You didn't know where you were going, right?
I still don't know where I'm going.
So, and in fact, with my next book, I remember we were finishing up Barbie. We were in like the last round of edits, and my editor said, "Do you have a beat sheet?" And I said, "Excuse me, a what?" And she said, "A beat sheet, each chapter and what's in." And I'm like, "No, but I can create that for you." So I did it, and I said, "This was such a good exercise." I said, "Could we do this before I start my next book?" And she's like, "Yeah, let's do it." So she reminded me. She's like, we're doing this for the next book. So I've spent like months trying to like work all this stuff out, and finally we both just said, let's just go ahead and start writing.
Because you know it's going to change.
Yeah, it's like it my brain just doesn't work that way. I know I write myself into 20,000 word corners, and I know that I make it harder for everybody involved, but it's the only way I can do it.
Renee, I am so glad to hear you say that, because I'm the same way. And I always
We
feel
could be
like
critique partners.
there's something wrong with me when sometimes I will be talking to other authors and they have this whole outline. I'm like, but what do you put in the outline?
Yeah.
I don't know what happens.
Yeah.
I don't know what happens until it happens.
Like, I come up with an idea, and they'll be like, yeah, but what's the story? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know that yet. I just know, like, this, but I don't know that. I'm the big idea person, details
Yeah.
from details.
And the corners that I call them cul-de-sacs. It's a really nice place to hang out, but it's not going anywhere.
Like, you'll have, like, a whole section where you're just treading water. Nothing is happening. You're not moving the story forward, but it's the process. You got to go through it.
Yeah, I don't know how any way to do it other than that
Yeah.
either. So
Yep.
So yeah, yay. Yay for us. If there's a snack bowl next to your writing computer, what is in your snack bowl?
Popcorn, microwavable popcorn. I will inhale that. In fact, if I'm really stressed, that's my go-to. Like, if I'm stuck, I'm just like, and yeah, it's the popcorn.
Butter
I
flavor?
can't- it's Pop Secret butter.
Yeah.
And I'm not responsible. I can't control myself with it. It's just,
That's a good filling fibery snack to have to consume
it's
in
just
quantity.
it's just
Yeah.
like this isn't working.
Just keep the coffee close by in
Yeah.
case What is your cure for writer's block when you have writer's block?
This is a little personal, but a shower. There is something, I get my best ideas in the shower, or I just need to like get up and do something different. It could be folding laundry. It could be, emptying the dishwasher. There's something about your brain doing something, your hands doing something that gets the brain going again. And I just need to get away from the laptop and, just free myself up. That and doing jigsaw puzzles. I do a lot of jigsaw puzzles.
love jigsaw
I started
puzzles.
during the pandemic and I just never stopped.
Can I bring my laundry to your house? Because mine always needs to be folded. Do you have, if you're on a book tour or doing an event, say, after the event is over, do you have any like wind down rituals? How do you come down from doing a book event?
That's when I'll usually, like have a glass of wine or just like I want to zone out on like mindless TV or something.
Ooh, what's your favorite mindless TV?
What have we been binging? I started watching, and Beth, you recommended it. Nobody Wants Us. Is that it?
Yeah, Adam Brody.
Yeah. Is
Yeah.
that it?
And Kristen Bell.
Yeah.
It's a
And
good
then
one.
we just finished Dexter. This is how behind we are, And 6 Feet Under we started watching because we had watched Dexter. So, just sort of, just something to just, like you say, wind down because you're really pumped up, and then you go from like 90 miles an hour to,
Yeah, got to turn the brain off.
yeah.
If you could take an all expenses paid writing sabbatical to anywhere in the world and set a novel there, where would you go?
Oh my gosh. I think I would go to London and just London or Paris because I mean the architecture is so beautiful. There's just I don't know. I think I would go and like maybe in the countryside in France and just hang out. And
That sounds really
absorb
lovely.
the local culture. And
Yeah.
what about you? Where would you go?
Oh my gosh.
Because you've been all over the place. You've
So
been
I would-
everywhere.
This question comes directly from the fact that I traveled to New Zealand last year, and I loved it. And my husband and I were sitting in this park in Queenstown, and our kids were playing. It was like a lake and like a playground, and our kids are playing with all the little New Zealand kids. And there's a cafe right at the edge of the park that serves like cold Sauvignon Blanc. And we're just sitting there, and we were like, "How do we move here? like really, how do we do that?" And the question, the answer is we don't practically, because it's a 14-hour flight, and our lives are here.
The commute's tough.
But there's like a visa for writers, where you can apply for it and get residency for like 2 or 3 years, but you have to contribute to the arts. Like I would have to, if I were to do it, I would have to write a book about New Zealand.
Okay.
So it's probably not in the cards. It's just hard with kids and family. But a little part of me still daydreams.
Something to think about. I would have to find some historical nugget in New Zealand to.
Yeah, it's a pretty like new country, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
Country, island, continent, country, both. Anyway, okay, this was a question that was asked of me at a book event, and I thought it was really interesting, and I still think about it, so I've been sharing it with other people that I interview. Of these 4 words, which would you call yourself? An author, a writer, an artist, or a storyteller?
A writer. And I think there's a big difference between being a writer and an author. A writer is very solitary work. That's just us and our computer and our words and our crazy minds. And then, all of a sudden the book comes out and it's like showtime. And then you have to I think the author is like the public thing, but the writer is like in her pajamas and her bathrobe, till 3 p.m. writing.
Oh, that's interesting.
Do you see it that way, or how do you?
I didn't before, but I do now. The author is the job part of it.
Yeah. And the writer is the part that wants to, slam their head against the laptop, and
That's writing down those 20,000 word corners that aren't
and
gonna
really
go anywhere.
struggling to find out what is compelling me to even tell this story. I didn't have that so much with Barbie, but I certainly have had it with other books. And it's very private, and it's very riddled with insecurities, and is this any good, and all that. And then the book comes out, and it's it's just like a switch. It's a different side.
Yeah.
And storyteller too, because we are telling stories. Artists, that feels that's a little frou-frou. Just that feels a little pretentious to me.
All right, we've got two more. What Barbie would you be if you're not going to be author Barbie? What other career would you have if you had to?
Am I creating a Barbie, or am I? I'm an existing Barbie.
No, you can make anyone you want.
Well, this is just where I'm at right now. Somebody asked me a similar question. I will say that I would create enlightened Barbie. Not that I'm enlightened, but I would strive for that. That she would be like really Zen, like she'd have a yoga mat and her incense and all that, and just sort of. She'd be reading Eckhart Tolle, and
She'd be totally not stressed out by everything that's
she
happening
would be
right now.
just like in the now, in the moment, and yeah.
Speaking of in the moment, what is next for you, book-wise?
I am just in the very earliest stages of the next book. This is one that I was supposed to do the beat sheets for, that I failed miserably. And but it feels good to be writing again. It's not enough that I can share it. I'm just too superstitious that when I don't know about you, when I talk about my ideas before they're formed, they just sound so flimsy and silly, and they just
You're like that's the dumbest thing I've ever. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just on a call with my editor, and I could just see her face, going, huh? So it's like, okay, that's a bad idea. So,
It'll come together.
Yeah, but it feels good to be writing again, because I was so busy with Barbie and getting Barbie ready to go that this is probably the longest stretch I've gone without writing.
Awesome. Well, I think we are going to go into some Q&A.
If you have a question, come down to the microphone and ask it so that everybody in the live stream can hear. And we can start with one of our virtual viewers' questions. This is from Anna. Anna says, it's been so fun watching you two in conversation. I wonder if you could talk about the relationship between writers when you're writing and when you're out on tour and making writer friends.
All I will say is that I think our writing community is just one of the warmest, most welcoming, accepting, supportive groups. I mean, I reached out to you, and I was like, would you like to do this with me? And you're like, yeah. And, writing is very isolating, and it's great to have friends who think the same crazy thoughts and have the same processes. And I just think it's a wonderful community. And it's a small circle, not even just the local Chicago authors, but, across the country.
Yeah. Well, and you allowed my son to sign a book
that
for
was
you when
so
you came to my
cute.
event.
That was so fun.
Chicago has a great writer and author community. It's been, I'm not originally from here, but I feel like I've been kind of just like swept into the fold and adopted a really great group of people. But it's lonely, and I don't know about for you, but it's, always that moment where, okay, now I've got to get blurbs for my book, or I'm going on tour and I have to find conversation partners. And you could see how it could turn very transactional.
Yeah.
Like, you're asking people for these favors, and it's like, well, now I owe you, or whatever.
Yeah.
But I feel like it doesn't end up feeling like that.
I feel like everybody gets it. We know, and there's a lot of anxiety that goes with bringing a book out. And it's great to have a writer friend who can talk you in off the ledge, because there's that lull right before the book comes out, and it's like really quiet, so you don't it feels like nothing's happening, and that's when your mind can go crazy.
Yeah, I remember thinking I wanted to pull the plug on it Because it
What?
was, well, no, but just like, yeah, because you're like, there's nothing happening. Everything is already done. It's beyond your control. And then you're like, but what if it's terrible? We can't do this. What if it's terrible?
Yeah, because it is out of your control. You know,
Yeah.
it's gone. It's out there, and then, yeah, you wanted to pull the plug.
Oh, how many times do you read your book?
Oh my God, so many times.
Like, it's like at least like a dozen, right?
oh, at least,
Yeah. So I feel like I had moments reading, the manuscript and then eventually the past pages and all that of Remarkably Bright Creatures. And sometimes there might be a couple months that would pass in between those different readings. And I remember having times when I read it and thinking like, oh, this is brilliant. Did I write this? This is really good. Like, this is awesome. And then there were a couple times where I was just like, the biggest cringe fest. Like,
Yeah.
this is so awful. I'm going to call my editor. We're
Yeah.
going to call the whole thing off.
I'm bored with this.
Why did I think this was good? All those lovely things that we
Yeah.
tell ourselves,
Yeah.
which,
and then like the technical stuff, like I didn't know how to work with track changes at one point, so I had to I'm like, this is all technical, like, can't I just have like a printout of this, and there's somebody that, or, just questions like, do you know a bookseller in such and such a city? I mean, everybody's very open in sharing resources and information, and so it's really it's a great circle to be a part of.
it is.
There's always room for more.
We have another virtual viewer question. Can you say more about how you find your writing experiences to be somewhat enlightening?
You want to take that?
I mean, I think for me, my favorite part of writing fiction is actually the same thing that happens to me as a writer and as a reader. And it's that moment when things kind of fall into place, where you discover something, where something just fits together and works. And, as we said before, I'm not really a plotter. So when that happens, it almost feels like magic. Like, it truly does, where I'm like, yes, and this works. And like, oh, and then that is symbolizing that. I didn't really mean to do that, but
Yeah.
somehow, somewhere in my brain, I guess I did, because it's happening. And I just remember feeling kind of astonished that could happen sitting
Yeah.
behind the writer's desk, because it's so special when it happens as a reader
Yeah.
in a book that you love, when you start, fitting the pieces together.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's something a little bit magic about writing.
Yeah, and the connecting the dots. Like, do you ever have a character? Like, this has happened to me on a couple books where character shows up on page 40, and I have no idea why this character is there. And I keep trying to write the character out, and the character keeps coming back and coming back.
They're
And
stubborn.
yeah, and then like on page 160, I'm like, now I know why that character is there, or now I know why this happened. So there is sort of where I feel like we become sort of vehicles almost. Like,
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
story is sort of, this sounds weird, but the story's kind of moving through us.
And you're
And-
guiding it,
Yeah.
but you don't have all the information.
Yeah, I feel like, once we breathe a certain amount of life into the characters, then they're off and running. And, when I'm being a good writer, I let them lead. When I'm being a bad writer, I try and direct them, and I always screw myself up when I do that, because they know more. I feel like they have a destiny to fulfill, and my job is just to listen to them and let them take me through.
Yeah, and that's where I get off track too. If I'm trying to write to an outline, or if I'm trying to write to a beat sheet, say, okay, this has to happen, this has to happen. It can kind of stifle that.
Yeah. I was going in circles. I was going nowhere fast doing that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's something organic about it that just, it's like a story comes to us, from the writing gods, and it's like, thank you. And we just tell the story as it comes to us, which is sort of weird.
So I think the answer is we are incredibly enlightened. Incredibly enlightened people. Thank you for that question. Leave feeling pretty good about myself tonight.
And I think we have time for one more question. This is from Tara, which is, what are you reading right now?
I am reading Elizabeth Strout's new book, Tell Me Everything. And you know what's amazing about her? And I felt this way with Lucy by the Sea, which was her previous novel. You know, she's so beautiful and subtle, and her books are quiet, but they pack a punch, man. Before you know it, you are really just so invested in these characters and in the story, but it creeps up on you. It's a powerful experience reading her.
I just finished Annie Hartnett's new novel. Her last one was Unlikely Animals, and we kind of had a kinship because our books came out around the same time and both had really weird animal vibes. And she has a new book coming out in April called The Road to Tender Hearts, and it's a road trip book with a magical cat and just a weird, zany, off-the-wall cast of characters, and it is just so lovely. Funny, a little bit dark, but like ultimately just so feel good.
All right, folks. Well, that is all the time we have for today, but please join me one more round of applause. Thank you to Renee. Thank you to Shelby. Of course, you may find their books at your local Chicago